There we go. All right, so welcome everyone. We really appreciate you all taking time out of your schedules to join today's webinar, Take the Risk and Cost out of your SAP to Google Cloud Migration. I'm Kristen Tanner with Managecore, and I will be moderating today's session. We will be getting started shortly, but first a few housekeeping notes. Please mute yourself when you're not talking, just to block any background noise. Our presenters will be answering questions at the conclusion of the webinar. If we don't get your questions at the end of the presentation, I or another member of the Managecore Google Cloud team will be sure to follow up with you directly. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available at the conclusion of today's session. We're really excited to have a great lineup of presenters today. First, Andy Hilliker from the Google Cloud team and Managecore's president, Frank Powell. So take it away, Andy.
All right, great. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Andy Hilliker. I run SAP sales for Google for the Northeast. I've been here at Google since December, and before this, I was at SAP for 15 years. So a lot of experience with customers in the SAP journey, and happy to be here. Frank, could we go to the next slide? So here's our agenda. I'm going to spend 15 or 20 minutes and just talk about Google Cloud, our relationship with SAP, why would you want to run SAP on Google anyway? And I'll end with a description of an incentive program that we have running in 2020. Then I'm going to hand it over to Frank, and Frank will talk about Managecore, migration customer use cases, and we'll end with some information about a customer. So let's go to the next slide and the next one. So when you think about Google, Frank, could you go to the next slide? There we go.
Yeah.
You know, for me, when I joined Google, I thought about search. That's kind of all I knew about Google. But really, if you look at these 9 applications, what's significant here is just the breadth of different things that Google offers. But also, each one of these applications supports over 1 billion users. That's 1 billion with a B. So that's a lot of users. I mean, it's almost mind-boggling the scope and the breadth of some of the applications that Google offers. But I think what's really significant here is that when we think about Google Cloud offering infrastructure, it's based on the kind of scale that we build into search, into maps, into YouTube, Gmail, and et cetera. So really, all of us running SAP are able to benefit from this kind of scale and this kind of engineering. Frank, could I have the next slide? Mm-hmm. In terms of our journey with our SAP customers, it really kind of falls into a number of different sort of steps. The first step is just moving your SAP estate or systems and applications over to Google Cloud. And here's where we take it from your on-prem co-location and other public cloud and really put it onto Google Cloud, and along the way modernize the applications. This is something that most of our customers do. It isn't just a lift and shift, but they'll do an enhancement pack upgrade. They'll move to S4. They'll move to Suite on HANA. Whatever they need to do to modernize that application. And then sort of the next step in their journey is connecting up their SAP data with some Google technology, usually housed inside a BigQuery, things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, predictive analytics. And this allows them sort of all the way over at the right to really gain better insights into their business, understand their customer, whoever their customer might be, and open up new innovation use cases to increase top-line revenue. Have the next slide, Frank. Google has a very strong relationship with SAP. So something that folks, I think, are unaware of is that SAP runs its business on Google Cloud Platform. And so about 2 years ago, SAP came to Google and said, hey, we want you to build a data center for us. And that's something that Google just doesn't do. When we build something, it's standard across all of our regions and all of our zones. But in this case, our partnership's very deep. And so we said, okay, yeah, we'll build you a data center. So today, all of S4 development occurs on that data center. 4,000 virtual machines, 20,000 developers. And that's significant because it means that S4 as an application has the most runtime on the Google architecture. And then of course, SAP has to take that and qualify it on other public cloud vendors. And Frank, if I could have the next slide. Alphabet or Google, we also run SAP. And so you could see kind of the California closet slide here of all the different SAP solutions that we run. But what's significant about this, I think, is that Google, of course, is a technology company. But what you may not be aware of is that Google is also a very, very large consumer product goods company. So we make a lot of devices, like this phone right here, or the Chromebook that I'm using right now, the Nest devices. And so we have a huge supply chain. So our SAP systems are very extensive. They're extremely large. And even though, yes, we do run our financials, we have S4 Finance, you'll see that up there on the slide, but also very large supply chain and implementation. Could I have the next slide, Frank? Our offering for SAP is enterprise ready. So we have all the required SAP certifications. So anything that you can run on premise, you can run inside of Google Cloud. We offer premium support that's integrated with SAP support and SAP Max Attention. Of course, all the enterprise availability sort of features that you would want in an enterprise application. Frank, we'll talk a little bit about that. And then a very large global partner ecosystem, of which Managecore is one of our primary partners. Could I have the next slide? So, what are some of the reasons that you would run SAP on Google Cloud? Well, the first is that because of the flexibility that we offer with our compute and with our virtualization, upgrades and changes to the system, any kind of upgrade to the system takes far less time than it would if you were on-prem. We also run our own network. So one of the things you might not know about Google is that we actually we run our own undersea cables and run our own private network. And so it's secure, much more secure, of course, than the public internet. But the response time in terms of latency and bandwidth is simply not offered anywhere else. One of the other things that we do from a commercial standpoint is that we only charge you for the compute and storage that you use when you use it, which means that you can right-size your environment and then add more resources as you require them, typically within minutes. And you're only charged for what you use when you use it. We also will reduce the amount of downtime that you'll experience using a thing called live migration. And then finally, we'll provide additional innovation for your SAP data by connecting it to technologies inside of BigQuery, like, as I mentioned earlier, machine learning and artificial intelligence. Could I have the next slide, Frank? And so hitting on that innovation play, we've done quite a bit of engineering work in conjunction with SAP to connect up BigQuery. So we support all the SAP technologies that move and federate data, things like Smart Data Access from HANA or Data Intelligence, SAP Data Services. Those will all connect up directly. So what you'll find is that it's quite straightforward and a very fast time to value to connect up and share data between SAP and BigQuery. And you can see here a list of customers that do some of this already. Could I have the next slide, Frank? One of the ways that we do this is just one example is with Google Vision API. And so things like drone visual inspection, product searches, which are two examples here. One of our customers, which is a tuna fishery, actually uses this capability to take pictures of fish as they come over the transom of their fishing fleet to reduce bycatch. That's a catch that's not a tuna for them. And they use this technology to do that. Can I have the next slide? Okay, so summary. So, why would you run SAP on GCP, or what are our differentiators? In my mind, it really comes down to three major areas. Operational. Okay, so we'll run SAP more efficiently and better than on-prem or other public cloud providers. Why is that? Because we're 100% virtualized. So today we offer the largest virtual HANA machines available, 12 terabytes. We're about ready to certify 18 and 24 terabytes. So that the entire environment's virtualized, there's no bare metal at all. We'll also offer HA and DR typically at a third of the cost of what you can do on premise, and some additional value with things like IP reconfiguration when you declare a disaster, so that you can do things in software. So it's actually very, very fast to do these kinds of events. In terms of backup and restore, seems like a small thing, but we leverage the SAP Backup API. Other vendors don't do this, which is shocking to me. But it just means that you can do your backups for a lower cost and for faster operations. And then finally, on the operational side, we use this thing called live migration, which allows us to move running workloads. So this reduces or completely eliminates downtime related to hardware. So with other vendors, what you're going to have to do is take a planned downtime on a periodic basis so they can upgrade hardware. We don't do that. We simply move the running workload, do the work on the hardware, and then move you back, so there's no downtime. What this also means is that we continually upgrade all of our data centers, CPU, memory, and storage-related architecture. And so you're always running on the latest chipsets. You're not locked into a particular chipset. On the commercial side, as I said before, very, very flexible, only build for what you actually consume, which allows us to right-size your environment, so you're not buying additional capacity up front to account for future growth. I'll talk a little bit in a minute about the Cloud Acceleration Program, which is an incentive program to move you over to GCP. So that's also on the commercial side. And then finally, innovation. And I think this is where the real top-line revenue-generating value is, where you can unlock that SAP data that's really valuable, generally very, very clean, and then leverage artificial intelligence, machine learning, other data sets to really gain more value from that data. Can I have the next slide, Frank? Okay, so the incentive program that we're running for 2020, we call it the Cloud Acceleration Program for SAP. This program is designed to move you from wherever you are onto Google Cloud Platform for exactly zero cost. And let me just say that a different way. We will take, in conjunction with Managecore, your SAP system, move it onto public cloud. We'll modernize it, do an EHP upgrade, move it to Suite on HANA, move it to S4, whatever makes the most sense for you. And we'll do that for zero cost, or $0 out the door for you until you're live in production. And we do this in a pretty unique way. Unlike other vendors, we actually fund the migration by writing a check to you, to the customer. And then we cover the infrastructure with credits on our platform. And so Frank's going to show an example of this, I think later on in his presentation. So I think that's it. So I think, Frank, I'm just going to turn it over to you. You can talk a little bit about Managecore and some of the stuff you guys are doing.
Great. Thank you very much, Andy. Some really good information in there. And I'll just say, there's probably a lot of detail behind those comments. And if you need any questions, please ask those at the end, or if you want to have a follow-up meeting about some of those details, happy to answer those as well. So very quickly, just for those of you who might not be familiar with who Managecore is, just one slide on who we are and what we do is, we are an SAP technology company. And by that, I mean, we focus on infrastructure, operating systems, databases, and basis administration is kind of our focus. So not a functional firm, not necessarily an SI, but we've always worked in this technology realm, which has led us down the path of becoming a Google partner for so many years that we have. What's unique about us is we feel very strongly about being transparent in everything we do. So the tools that we use, documentation we create, everything we do, we share with our customers. So we are very 100% focused on customer satisfaction and what they do. We're also 100% focused on SAP. So many vendors claim to do a lot of things and be the jack of all trades, but Managecore focuses on just managing SAP workloads. Now, if that comes to moving to the cloud and you have non-SAP workloads, yes, we would manage all the systems you move to the cloud, but all of our customers have SAP in some fashion, and is what we do. And we also base ourselves or pride ourselves in really hiring senior level consultants without tiered support models and things like that. So when you call Managecore, or if you have a problem or if you have a question, our goal is to put the first person you talk to is someone that can answer your question. So now, when it comes to GCP specifically, we were one of the first, as we call ourselves, kind of boutique or mid-market customers that supported SAP workloads on GCP, and we started our partner journey way back in 2017, which seems so long ago at this point. But because of that, we migrated the first live S4 running system into GCP, and that was a company called FFF, and there's a case study that we'll talk about in a minute. We've been using some of these partner funding programs that Google has for the last year, so we're very familiar with how they work and the mechanics of what they do. And up there in the right-hand corner, it's kind of hard to see, but we also have achieved Google's SAP expertise classification, as well as their specialization around SAP as well. So we had to go through an audit process for that, which we just did a few weeks ago, and so very proud of that. But very, very devoted to running SAP workloads on Google and making sure they're successful. And maybe just last not least is we are also an SAP partner. So when it comes to marrying those two companies together and dividing the workloads and the solutions, can help you kind of on any regard there. So let's now talk really more specifically about running SAP more at a kind of a detailed level in the Google Cloud. One of the first questions that always usually comes up, is, can I run any of my SAP applications in the Google Cloud? And my answer usually is generally yes, provided you're relatively modern, right? So if you're running 4.6c, probably not. But if you're running anything modern as far as the common applications, and you see them listed there, S4, BW for HANA, Business Suite, which is the old ECC, CRM, SRM, those applications are all supported, as well as all the common databases that you would normally think of, and operating system platforms. So there's always a path to get you there. And what we find is generally when people want to move to the cloud, they are looking to modernize something. So what we see a lot of people doing is taking the opportunity to maybe they're on Oracle today, but they'd like to get to Suite on HANA. Very simple way to do that. Or maybe they're on older versions of Windows, and they'd like to modernize that or put an enhancement pack, as Andy said. So pretty much all modern applications that SAP runs are supported in the Google Cloud. But if you want to consider some modernization along the way, we can absolutely do that. One of the very first things, and we start a project and a discussion like this, is we will look at SAP's PAM, right, the Product Availability Matrix, and the OSS notes, and make sure that what you have today is supported or what that path is to get us there. So, but in general, like I said, most common applications are supported. As far as the actual path to get there, and as Andy said, migrations can be done in weeks, not years. For those of you that have been working in SAP for any length of time, most SAP projects are lengthy, they're costly. Most people feel there's a lot of risk in them. But I feel that between Managecore and Google's technology that they have makes a migration pretty straightforward. We've been doing this enough times and have and obviously a lot of references for folks to talk to. But there's a methodology here that's very straightforward. The tools are matured enough to go to the cloud. The company FFF we'll talk about in a minute, we migrated their entire landscape in less than 12 weeks. So when you think of migrating a whole landscape in that short amount of time, with no risk and limited downtime, that just is, to me, proof that the tools and the methodology have really matured. So, I won't go through this whole necessarily strategy in a lot of detail, but as I mentioned, the very first step is what is kind of your cloud adoption strategy? Like, where are you really trying to go and what do you want to do? There's a lot of reasons that people move to the cloud. Sometimes it's cost, sometimes it's modernization, sometimes it's, getting out of the CapEx spending model of having to, repurchase hardware every 3 to 5 years. But you want to identify that, and then that will help us kind of develop the path and the right strategy for you going to the cloud. Then quickly thereafter, we go through that process I mentioned of identifying, well, what do you have that's running SAP today? How does that translate into the cloud? Map that out, which then kind of gives us that general architecture that we would look at, and whether or not you'd want to run a pilot process and just, prove it to you. Some customers want to do that and make sure that, yes, it all sounds good. Can it prove to me that it's going to work as good in the cloud as it does on-prem or maybe a private cloud as well? So we can go through those processes as well. And then obviously go through the migration and then kind of roll out the rest of the landscape kind of in a timely manner. But again, we've used this strategy several times, and there's many, many customers running SAP in GCP very successfully. Now, the migration process itself, we kind of think of in 3 forms. And this kind of goes back to what that strategy you have about getting the cloud is and what the process is. And I also mentioned that it doesn't necessarily all have to be done in one step. So if you think of these 3 strategy here, which is the first one, move, which is what we typically refer to as true lift and shift, which is just taking what you have and moving it to the cloud, right? So no changes to the application, no changes maybe to the underlying operating system or database. That's the fastest way to move. Obviously, you can maybe gain some cost savings rather quickly in doing so. But it also requires that you're in an environment or your platform is on the versions and the products that are supported in GCP, right? So if you're already in a supported platform and you want to quickly get to the cloud, a lift and shift or the move would be the first type of migration. The second, what we call migrate, is where we're getting into the cloud, but we're going to change some underlying component, meaning we're changing operating systems or changing databases. This is probably, for me, the most common thing we see customers doing, whereby people are moving from maybe a traditional relational database and trying to get to HANA in this one step into the move. So what that means, as an example, is if you're running ECC6 and enhancement, pack 7 or 8 or higher, and we can do this, we can upgrade your enhancement pack if needed. But if you're on a relatively recent enhancement pack, we can take you from running ECC on top of DB2 or SQL Server or Oracle and migrate you into the cloud and put you on HANA at the same time. And effectively, then you're not running S4 at that point, but you are running what SAP calls Suite on HANA, meaning you're running ECC6, but just on the HANA database. So very straightforward process. This is exactly what we did for one of our other customers we're going to talk about in a few minutes at Distribution Now. And again, very successful. They had great performance gains. And again, what is the strategy in trying to move here? But a very common thing we see folks doing is this migrate path to do some modernization of the infrastructure as part of your move to the cloud. And then lastly is true transformation. When not only do you want to move to the cloud, maybe likely want to or be forced to change an operating system and database, but you're also trying to do something else transformationally around the data, the application. Maybe this is a migration to S4 as part of this process. Maybe this is augmenting your BW system with BigQuery. So as part of that, you have a strategy of you really want to get better analytics in your data. So as part of this move, you want to leverage those additional applications. So that can be done. But as you can imagine, as you do more and more as part of the migration project, there's more remediation that might need to take place, more development, and more testing. So again, you can choose these paths how you like. A lot of times what we see is people saying, well, let's just do the move. Let's lift and shift, get me to the cloud. Then I'll do my S4 upgrade as kind of a phase 2. And that makes a lot of sense as well, because now once you're in the cloud, you have unlimited resources. You can scale to whatever you need to be. You can test very easily because you have all the infrastructure and the applications kind of at your fingertips. But we kind of categorize these migrations in these 3 different forms. Now, you may ask, well, how do I actually move my application, right? So regardless of kind of what your strategy is, there's kind of two sets of tools that we use to actually migrate your data. The first one roughly is through SAP tools, and that's through DMO or heterogeneous or homogeneous migration, which is SAP's kind of standard tool set for migrating platforms or to different data centers. And effectively, if you think about this, what this really means is kind of exporting your database out to flat files and then importing it into the target environment. So that's the first process. And then the second opportunity is to use some of the new cloud migration tools. And Google has their own tool, which is called Migrate for Compute Engine. So you might have heard it called Velostrada. It was called Anthos Migrate for a time. So it is the same tool set, more or less, but now it's called Migrate for Compute Engine. And what this allows us to do is actually migrate the virtual machines from the source location to the target location. There's some benefits to this, is basically it can kind of sync up those two VMs, and then you kind of flip a switch and you go live from one environment to the second with real minimal downtime. Those tools do allow you to kind of mix in upgrades, so you can actually you kind of tag in like a DMO, like an upgrade of SAP as a second step of the migration in those tools as well. Most of them, at least Google's tool, are free if you're migrating into the Google Cloud, so there's no cost for the software of the tool itself. And you can actually do some pretty rapid deployments of large number of servers. So maybe if you have a data center, you want to move SAP, but you have 300 or 500 other servers you want to move, these cloud migration tools make it extremely easy, and they're very powerful to move those large volume of workloads into the cloud. And one of the processes that what Managecore would do is sit down and understand your landscape, what the source and the target platforms are, what you're trying to achieve, and we would use a combination of maybe multiple tools to migrate those workloads depending upon what they are. But it generally falls into one of these two kind of categories of the tool sets we use to move you to the cloud itself. Now, one thing that comes up right after we start talking about the migration to the cloud and the tools that we use, it's like, well, my databases are really big. How can you actually migrate the volume of data that we have into the cloud in an acceptable down window? So that little graph on the side is maybe a little hard to read. It is actually one of the graphs that's published right on Google's website. And I put it up there just to kind of put people's mind at ease. It's just it's a matter of speed. Most of the migrations we have done, we have not used physical devices to transfer the data. We have moved most of them through the internet. The most recent one we did, we actually just stood up a temporary 10 gigabit circuit of internet connectivity. We created VPN tunnels from the client to GCP, and we transferred that data over that 10 gigabyte circuit. Again, it was provisioned on a temporary basis. And if you look over here in this far right column, again, I apologize if you can't read it, you can start to see how fast you can move data, right? You can move, where is this, a terabyte of data on a 10 gig circuit in 18 minutes, right? So you can start to move things pretty fast with temporarily provisioned, just generic internet access. Now, the other thing to realize is you might say, well, but my database is 10 gigabytes and it's sitting on Oracle. So how do you move that 10 terabyte database? Well, when using SAP tools, remember you export that data to flat files, and when it comes out into flat file format, it's generally 10 to 20% of the database size. So that 10 terabyte database, when it's exported to flat files, might only be 1.5 terabytes of data that actually has to be transferred, right? So that's how the math works and how we get to this process. But these are one of the things that Managecore would help you understand is based on the size of the database, the method and process of which we're going to migrate you, what size internet is needed. Also want to point out another thing that uniquely that Google has is the ability to bind multiple VPN tunnels into a single channel. So you can take, because there are limits of how much data you can get through one VPN tunnel itself, but you can bind multiple tunnels together to actually get higher throughputs. So that's possible as well. So and then lastly, Google does have transfer appliances, and transfer appliances are great if you have terabytes and terabytes of what I call more static data maybe you have a large volume of like web content or something like that, or documents or videos, things like that. The transfer appliance is great for those type of things. With SAP productive systems, though, what we find is we are fighting such a short down window. The transfer appliance just isn't a fast enough mechanism to, again, because then we're back to shipping a physical appliance, dumping data to it, sending it overnight, unpackaging it, getting it, the data transferred up into the cloud, and then doing the import. So, but those are available depending upon the type of data that you're actually looking to move to the cloud. So one of the customers that I mentioned earlier was FFF Enterprises. So this is one of the two customers speaking directly about the migration process itself. So FFF was in a private cloud, had several outages in the prior year, looking for better performance, better stability, and options as far as beyond just infrastructure kind of as a service. So they were migrated in 12 weeks. We used a migration tool and just basically moved their virtual machines as is, which again helped us get this done in such a short timeline. They have a handful of different locations around the U.S. mainly, so there wasn't a lot of complex networking, I would say, involved with this. So it's pretty straightforward from a networking standpoint, but we did several iterations of this test migration to get it down right. Now, again, with these tools, what they allow us to do, since we're not exporting the database, we're just moving the virtual machines, these tools allow you to kind of synchronize the source and the target platforms, and when the data is ready, you can actually flip the switch. So in this case, using a cloud migration tool, they only had about 4 hours of downtime for the productive landscape. So we migrated that whole landscape, started it back up. When we flipped the switch, they did a couple hours of validation, and then we turned it back over to the business. So they only had, like I said, a 4-hour outage window to move their entire SAP landscape. So their user impact was very minimal. Now, the benefits they received are pretty tremendous. When you look at where they were and where they went to, they've said they have over a 7x performance, a 700% increase of some of the reports that they run versus where they were prior to going to the Google Cloud. Again, the migration was done in 12 weeks. The other thing they're extremely happy with is the stability of the Google platform. As I mentioned, they had suffered several production outages in prior years. They've suffered no productive outages in GCP, along with the management that Managecore is providing them in supporting their basis and the infrastructure. But more exciting, I think, is they did all of those things or achieved those benefits and still managed to save 80% over what they were paying on a month-to-month basis with their current provider or prior provider. So lots of benefits, including financial savings. And that's, to me, one of the real powers of the cloud. We see customers all the time that are moving to the cloud, getting all these other benefits, and you'll see some other examples when we talk about DNow, and saving money in the process. If you've been in IT for 20 years or whatever, it used to always be get all these extra benefits used to cost you extra money. Well, today we're actually seeing these benefits and saving you money. So very powerful example there. So now let's talk about this cloud acceleration program that Andy mentioned earlier. Basically, there's two main components to the CAP program from a financial standpoint. The first one is they're going to give you this rebate check to pay for the migration to the cloud itself. So that rebate check works out to be about what 1 year's cost of the cloud would be to you, right? So we'd have to calculate out what your monthly spend is, kind of multiply that times 12, and that's what the rebate check would basically equate to. For most applications, I have yet to see where that dollar amount hasn't been enough to pay for the migration to the cloud. So this is where there's no cost to you as a customer to actually migrate where you are today, the cost of the migration itself to the cloud. The second component is the 6 months free of GCP credits, because we recognize while you're migrating to the cloud, you still have your SAP running someplace, right? So maybe you're in a private cloud, maybe you're in another one of the public cloud vendors, you still have that expense. So for another benefit here is Google's trying to defray that cost of having to pay for 2 data centers. So the first 6 months of that migration would be paid for. I'll say this with even Annie on the phone. If your migration took 7 months or 8 months, talk to us. We'll see what we can do. But the standard program are those two items together. In the next slide, I'm going to go through this in great detail. So just hang with me on that one. The last thing I want to say is about the competitive pricing of Google. And again, Annie mentioned this a little bit, because I've had a couple customers say, well, yeah, Google's going to give me this money up front, but that just means I'm going to pay more once I'm live. And my experience has been absolutely the opposite of that. They have extremely competitive pricing. And what I would also say is, when you compare, or if you're comparing Google against any of the other hyperscalers, you need to really go to a really granular level and understanding what you typically do in managing your SAP environment, meaning how many times do I stand up a temporary server? How many times do I grow from where I was and need to expand? Or how many times do I need to pare back some of the resources? Because that's where the three cloud vendors really separate themselves, and Google is by far and away has the best pricing model when it comes to an environment that changes, whether it be growth or paring something back. So they're very competitive pricing after go live. And this sample chart I have on the right is really just, again, a typical customer, especially those coming out of a private cloud. We're seeing basically about a 20 to 25% cost savings just on the infrastructure. So you can see there, if your private cloud costs were X, what I would assume your Google/Managecore cost would be, and the savings you would have kind of month to month, and then what we see as a 3-year savings over time, provided you cost you nothing to actually get the migration or have the migration paid for to move there. So pretty straightforward program. Now, this slide, again, just want to go through the math, because it's really easy for people to estimate this, and it is very straightforward. So the assumptions here, again, the cost of the $40K per month, if you, just a medium SAP landscape, maybe you have 4 or 5 SAP products, right? I have just a couple lists there, maybe 60 so servers, right? So if we put that into the Google calculator, let's say that was $40,000 a month of Google Cloud costs, right? So that means that 3-year total cost of ownership would be about 1.4 million. And I've got this label wrong, I'm sorry, but the migration rebate, it works out to about 33% of the 3-year spend, because it's 1/3, but it technically is 12 months of the monthly spend. So 12 times 40 is $480,000. So that $480,000 is the rebate that Google would pay to have your SAP system migrated to the cloud. That's the first component. The second component then is the 6 months of ramp up. So again, if the monthly recurring spend is about $40,000 times 6 months, that's $240,000. Now, the thing I like to point out here is the 3-year total cost, or the TCV, is 1.4 million. So that's the 40,000 times 36 months. But if you add up the migration rebate and the 6 months ramp up, that's $720,000. If you look at that number compared to what your 3-year spend is, that's a considerable investment that Google is making to you as an SAP customer to move your workload to the Google Cloud. And I can tell you, no other vendor is offering that kind of a financial incentive to get there. So I wanted to show you this in detail because the math works out the same. All you need to know is what your monthly GCP spend would be. Once you know that, it's very easy to flow through the numbers and understand at least a ballpark what your migration rebate and the ramp-up costs of the infrastructure credits would be. So pretty powerful program. So a customer that actually went through that and utilized that program was Distribution Now. So they are live. They've been live. They started the project last year. They went live back in April. But they, again, wanted to modernize their infrastructure. I think I mentioned that they were a customer that was running on AIX and Oracle. They wanted to modernize and get to HANA. So we moved them. Most of their servers went from Oracle to HANA. A handful of them went to ASE. So not everything was on HANA, but they got completely rid of Oracle. So their Oracle support contract was eliminated, and everything moved to GCP and in either a HANA or a ASE database. So again, they also were looking to get better performance. They were trying to, again, get out of the CapEx spend and really get to a more OpEx spend from a financial standpoint. They didn't have, let's say, a lot of outages, but performance was really an issue for them. And probably most of all, they were looking to save money. So part of this was they knew they were spending a lot in the private cloud they were in today or at the time, and they were really looking to save some money. So some of the results that they saw out of this is they saw a 4x, like a 400% performance improvement kind of across the board. So the performance that they were hoping to gain, they absolutely did. I remember in their go live, and this isn't just transactional performance, but their BW loads that ran every night were running about 16 hours. We paired them back, but the first week we ran their BW loads, they ran in 7 hours. And I'll never forget, their IT director was like, well, can't we do better than that? And we all kind of had a chuckle because we went from 16-hour loads to 7-hour loads, and we knew we could get better, but that was just for those themselves a significant increase overnight just by moving to the cloud. In their case, they also wanted to take advantage of some of the other, I'll call them applications that Google that offers. So they already have started a BigQuery project. They're talking about moving other data center workloads there in addition to SAP. They do have that true 24/7 by 365 peace of mind support. And again, talk about stability. They have not, again, had any productive outages. Performance is great. So from a platform, they're very, very happy with Google. And in their case, they are literally going to save millions of dollars over the next 5 years. Again, a terrific financial story. Not only did they modernize their infrastructure, they got to HANA, they went to GCP, they're leveraging these other applications, they have great stability, and they're saving millions of dollars in the process. Again, these are opportunities that just are hard to come by, and again, the CAP program is a great program for SAP customers. So what would be the next steps if what we've talked about today, kind of as we wrap up here, what between, kind of the details that Annie gave you about Google Cloud, understanding the CAP program, kind of what would be the next steps? And it's pretty simple. And because I understand that people don't like to get these real drawn out sales cycles, but they want to know directionally, is this going to fit for me? What's the benefits? So we've tried to boil this down to very, very simple things for you. First, just contact your Google or Managecore sales rep. Get in touch with us. Say you're interested and you want to, hey, I want to understand what the cost benefits would be to moving to the cloud. We need just some basic information, right? Just kind of tell me a little bit about your landscape. Most SAP customers, they have a landscape diagram that might already have this information in it. It doesn't have to be a special format. And what we're looking for is just the versions of the operating system, database, and SAP product you run, and the number of systems you have, and a little bit about what your HA and DR requirements are. If you can provide us those kind of 3 basic pieces of information, Managecore and Google will put that together and give you kind of a preliminary quote within about a week. And that's the way we can start the conversation, understand what this means for you as a company, what the financial benefits would be. And then obviously we can talk more details about, is there some additional transformational work you're interested in doing? Are there other workloads in addition to SAP you might be interested in moving to the cloud? But this would be a very simple next step to kind of learn more about the CAP program, more about the Google Cloud, and how Managecore could support your migration effort. So with that, just wanted to say thank you. And Kristen, we can kind of open it up for some questions.
Excellent. Thanks, Andy, and thanks, Frank. That was fantastic. So if anyone has any questions at this time, you can either ask them live or you could chat them in. And I do see a few coming in here on the right-hand side. Again, feel free to open your mic and or just type in your question and send it through. So Frank, do you see the first question here from Robert?
Let me just open up my little window there. I think I saw it when he popped in there. And commit to complete migration. Yeah, so the basic commitment is they want you to have the project completed within 12 months, which again, most migrations fall into that category. I don't know, Andy, if there's any other commitments to that as far as the timeline.
In terms of the timeline, the only other thing is just that the SO, we fund the SOW, so we just need a copy of the SOW.
Yep.
For the migration.
And then on the credits get applied to the GCP billing ID. So I don't, Andy, maybe you can help me a little there. I don't know if all Google products and services go against that billing ID the same way, but my assumption is anything that would be billed against your billing ID, the credits would apply to, right?
Yep.
So,
and you have control over how you apply those credits. And so ensure any commitment made for is so you actually only get billed for what you consume. So there's no I think danger that you would apply a credit to something that you didn't use unless you had something turned on that you weren't using. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that, I think what Andy also means is if you want to use all the credits like upfront, or you can spread them out and say, hey, I need some credits this year, and you could ask to have some credits applied next year. So you can ask to have them applied in different time frames if need be. So.
Okay,
Awesome.
if kind of a follow-up with that, if I may, with that SAP migration question, you mentioned typically it would need to be completed within the first year. Depending upon the scope and the size of that, the approach could simply be to stand up anything net new first and get that up and going, and then do migrations from your on-prem to GCP. If that is the case and that migration process does not start within, that first year, is there an option there where that SAP migration rebate or credit could be extended past that first year?
Yeah, I mean, we'd need to, sort of understand it, but the way that it works mechanically is that, you're gonna work with Managecore to create a statement of work for the migration. You'll submit the signed copy and countersigned copy to us just so that we can take a look at it to make sure. One thing we can't do because of revenue recognition is we can't fund managed service. So
Right.
So we need to make sure that we validate that. And as soon as we do validate it, we just simply write the check. So
Okay.
the funds happen up front, and then you presumably use that to turn around and pay the SOW.
Okay.
If the project we want to do the right thing for the customer. So if there's a reason that the project needs to take more than 12 months, we'll take a look at it. We'll have to go through an exception process, but we would do that.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and Robert, I know a little bit why you're asking those questions. I think we can have a sidebar conversation, because I don't think what you're asking is too far out of the norm. It's just the timing of your particular project. So I think we could work within those parameters for you to take advantage of the program here. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Another question that is kind of a common question we hear a lot, Frank, is how can a managed service solution help optimize my SAP systems when they're running in the Google Cloud?
Yeah, well, that's just unique, because when you go to the cloud, I think it is a different animal, right? It's not the same as just running infrastructure on-prem. It's a set of building blocks that you need to understand how those building blocks go together instead of traditionally just running infrastructure in your own data center. So that's probably the biggest piece, and making sure that we're putting those building blocks together in an efficient manner, because we probably all talked to people who've gone to the cloud. They went to the cloud 3 or 4 years ago and said, oh, we went there and we had a horrible experience. It was way more expensive than we thought. We didn't get what we expected out of it. And from my experience, when I hear those comments, I generally think it wasn't architected right. You weren't taking advantage of the pricing mechanism that the cloud vendor had. Again, if you're willing to commit to a year or 3 years, there's actually discounting that happens. Google also has what's called a sustained use discount. So if you use it full time for the whole month, you just get a discount just because you use the resource for the entire month. So, but are you leveraging the discount strategies, the right architectures and things like that? And when you're going to make a commitment, are you going into the commitment to those resources, understanding the longevity of that workload, what might change in your landscape? And those are all things, again, as a managed service provider, not only do we help manage SAP from a basis perspective, but we will help manage the GCP infrastructure and give you that guidance along the way. So for our customers, before we put them into any commitment, we sit down and walk through, okay, here's the commitment, here's the savings you're going to achieve, here's the workloads that are in those environments, and making sure the customer agrees and fully understands what we go into, because it might be better to not put certain workloads into a commitment because you might be turning them off in 12 months or 18 months. So we would work with you to make sure that you understand how those mechanisms work. And again, I want to repeat that Google's pricing mechanism is the most flexible in the industry. But there is a little bit of an art to it to make sure from an SAP perspective that you're leveraging all the cost savings, yet not, taking on more resources that you don't need. So.
Excellent. One other question, Andy, this one might be for you, but if you are interested in taking advantage of the CAP program, is there a deadline to do so, just to have a commitment to Google in by?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So this program is funded through 2020. So that's the guidance I have right now. We just need to execute on it this year.
Absolutely.
So.
All right. I think that about wraps it up. I really appreciate a lot of folks stayed on the line here the whole time, and it was again a great webinar. We have everything recorded. The recording will be available on Managecore.com. I'll also send it out to everyone. Any slides or any other particular information, as Frank said, that if you want to do a deep dive, please feel free to reach out to myself, Frank, Andy, Carl, your FSR. We're happy to help and get you going to the next steps here and get your systems in the cloud.
Great.
All right, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Have a great afternoon. Bye now.